Today is Good Friday. It's the day that we remember Jesus' crucifixion, the day that we remember Jesus being tortured and nailed by his hands and feet to a cross. So in what sense is this Good Friday? Why would we call that event a good thing? In what sense was the Friday of Jesus' execution and death good? Why don't we call it Failure Friday or Foolish Friday? I mean, after all, from the world's perspective, there's no question that the Friday of Jesus' death is foolish. In fact, Paul tells us that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning in verse 21. Let me read that for us. For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. You see, we preach Christ, we proclaim Christ, a Messiah who was crucified. It's a foundational fact of the Christian faith. And yet that foundational fact is a stumbling block and folly or foolishness to the watching world. It makes no sense. Why would the all-powerful, eternal, glorious Son of God allow his creation to beat him, torture him, put nails through his hands and feet, shove a crown of thorns on his head, and hang him on a cross, left to die? Yet, Paul goes on to say that those who are Christians, that we who follow Jesus, see in that very execution of Jesus, we see our hope on display. We see the power of God and the wisdom of God on display. Verse 21 of 1 Corinthians 1, just to read it again, says, in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom. It pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. Now, of course, Paul doesn't mean that the gospel is folly or that the gospel is foolishness, but that when we proclaim the gospel to the ears of the listening world, it sounds like folly. It sounds like foolishness. Yet it is that very reality that God intends to use to save us, the good news of the gospel. The power of God is put on display when He awakens our darkened hearts and allows us to see in the execution of Jesus the glory of what He accomplished there for us. He allows us to see the beauty of the cross, and then we can call it Good Friday. You see, when God breaks through the darkness of our hearts, we no longer see failure or foolishness in the death of Christ on the cross. We see victory, and we're able to embrace the truth of 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24, which says this: He Himself bore our sins in His body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By His wounds you have been healed. You see, by the grace of God to us, we don't see foolishness on the cross. We see our debt being paid by Jesus on the cross. We see the wrath of God poured out on Jesus in our place. We see that by the wounds of His suffering, we have been healed. And now, because of the finished work of Christ, we're no longer slaves to sin. We are free to live a joyful life of obedience to Jesus Christ. So yes, today is Good Friday. Of course, even so, if Good Friday was the end of the story, it would not be good. It's only because there is more to the story that Good Friday is good. It is only because of what we will celebrate this Sunday, this Easter Sunday, that the story of the cross is good news. It is the work of Christ in His resurrection that makes the cross come to completion, that allows us to see the victory of Christ in it. So may today, this Good Friday, create within us a longing to celebrate the victory of Christ over death when Sunday comes.
Away my sin, nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. Oh, no other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Yes, I see nothing but the blood of Jesus. For my cleansing, yes, I plead the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know, nothing but the Jesus. We're singing, oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Sing this out. Oh, your love there for me. Oh, your blood in crimson streams. Oh, your death is hell's defeat. Cross victory is my victory. Oh, your love there for me. Oh, your blood crimson streams. Oh, your death is hell's defeat. Cross victory is my victory. Sing, oh, precious is the flow that makes me white